You are listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank, your partner in possible.
What is up, Chiefs team, and welcome into today's episode of KCSN Update. I'm Tucker Franklin, hanging out with my guy, Aaron Ladd. You probably know him from the TV. If you turn your dial to channel 41, like I've always got my channel dialed to 41 to catch Aaron. He's a sports anchor there on KSHB 41. Aaron, how you doing? I'm so glad we could sit down, get to catch up about this Chiefs football team.
This is awesome. Long overdue, my guy Tuck. We're just missing the seltzers here, like to really make this a Tucker Franklin affair. No, this is awesome, man. Appreciate you having me on. It's kind of that we were just talking before coming on, Mike. Kind of the quiet time, vacations. Just got off the grill. Memorial Day was this past weekend. This is supposedly quiet time, but we know there's no quiet time in the NFL.
They make it a 12-month-a-year sport. Sometimes 13 months a year, it seems like, with the NFL. They make it all year round, and it is insane. As you mentioned when we were off the top of the show, we had the draft in Kansas City, so that didn't stop. Coming off a Super Bowl parade, goes right into the draft. So in Kansas City, it was nonstop. Finally having those streets open. I don't know about you, but finally having those streets open downtown by Union Station. I felt like they were closed forever with the prep getting up ready for the draft, and then even afterwards they kept them closed for like a week longer. So it's good to have the city kind of emptied out now.
I just avoided that area for a while. Outside of like the draft, went out Thursday night, had a great time. First round, it was packed. Great to see the city on fire. Locals, we were like, nah, we're good. I'll stay away. I'll see y'all next time. The 2026 stuff, having that up at Union Station.
Oh yeah, no, super cool. I love also about like the 2026 World Cup when they dropped the logo, right? I love that every picture of Union Station also had like the Spider-Man experience picture in it too, because they had the Spider-Man experience there. So like, yeah, this is the World Cup logo. Also, you can go see Tom Holland's Spider-Man suit down in the basement.
Perfect timing.
It's incredible. But let's get into it. Let's talk about D-Hop before we talk about some players primed for a breakout season in 2023, because there's a lot of guys that you start looking on this roster and you'd be like, wow, it's a big year for a lot of these guys, young guys and kind of older guys too. But let's talk about DeAndre Hopkins first. Aaron, I spent a whole podcast yesterday with Charles Goldman at Chiefs Wire talking about DeAndre Hopkins kind of from all angles. But that's really what everyone's talking about right now is, can the Chiefs come in? Can they sign DeAndre Hopkins? The Bills or another team kind of looking at DeAndre Hopkins. I want to know, Aaron, your thoughts on kind of the situation as a whole, because it's really weird. Like, he got released, which is also a very strange thing. I don't know if the league as a whole anticipated him being released. So what are your thoughts on the whole DeAndre Hopkins situation?
This has been a saga that we've been following for so long now. It's like that couple that's like, are they going to break up? Are they going to stay together? They're fighting all the time. Him and the Cardinals going back and forth. The most recent thing I saw, Tucker, was him on IG talking about, oh, I'm here. Who said I wanted to leave? Who said I wanted to find another quarterback? And then being on a podcast like a week later saying, oh, yeah, if there was 5 quarterbacks not in Arizona, these are the ones that I want to play with. Him being a free agent now, and being able to get for nothing, right? The whole thing up to this point was you had to trade for him. You had to approximate what his value would be, plus the money that he was supposedly supposed to be getting this first year. Where the cap hit was like $30 million. I think it was like 19. There was a lot of funny money in there and stuff like that. But the fact that he's now been cut, he can talk to multiple teams, and you can get him for the price of acquisition. It's interesting. As far as KC is concerned, and I said this on 610 locally, and I've said this other places, I just feel like there's no room in the end, to use a biblical reference. KC has operated this entire offseason as if they are working with already who's in-house, plus the second-round draft pick, Rashee Rice. Also, they've invested 2 second-rounders in back-to-back years, or they've invested a second-rounder in the position in back-to-back years. Long-term, those guys are going to be on the roster. I added Justin Watson as well as a guy who they've liked. Mahomes has called a security blanket in the past. They signed him to a multi-year deal this offseason. We know how they feel about Kadarius Toney. They acquire Richie James, a guy who's shown the ability to do it in an offense similar. I just feel like DeAndre Hopkins for the Chiefs is something that maybe could have happened a few months ago at the right price, but right now it feels like there's a lot of different factors to getting it done, of course, including money.
For sure, and I definitely there's so many different, we talked about this yesterday. It's such a nuanced conversation about what can work and what can't. I know the money side of it's talked about, and then people who are really wanting DeAndre Hopkins out here say, well, you can just restructure Chris Jones, or you can extend Chris Jones and restructure that first year. You can get him in. at that point, it's just like, is the juice worth the squeeze at that point? When it comes to DeAndre Hopkins, a really interesting question that Charles kind of gave and threw at me yesterday. Another guy the Chiefs have been talking about re-signing, bringing in, is Frank Clark. I don't know how much the Chiefs have been talking about it, more like Chris Jones has been talking about.
Everybody on Twitter has been talking about it, basically.
Right. And if he wants to come back on a team-friendly deal, you got to think the Chiefs would be open to that. And he basically phrased this question to me of, who do you think would benefit the Chiefs kind of for the longer term, right? If they were to re-sign DeAndre Hopkins or to re-sign Frank Clark, who we saw training camp last year out there with George Karlaftis. Now he's got FAU. He's got B.J. Thompson to work with as well. I'm curious to what your thoughts are on that. As who do you think kind of long-term helps? Because DeAndre Hopkins can do the same thing in the receiver room, really.
And if DeAndre Hopkins comes to Kansas City on that incentive-laden short-term deal that everybody here in Chiefs Kingdom believes that every player wants and would want to sign to get to play with Patrick Mahomes, he's not going to do that long-term. He's going to do that and get his ring in this mystical scenario and then use that as the jump spring and the trampoline to go get the final deal. Remember, he turns 31 in a few weeks, right? He's coming up on past that point of what we consider as his prime. You can consider what you want on that. But this is an older receiver. How much are you really getting out of the lemon as far as DeAndre Hopkins if you acquire him for a long-term deal or a multi-year deal this offseason? Frank Clark is interesting. I love how we have fantasized that relationship. That relationship is similar to what I described earlier. Chiefs fans hated him at first. He's not the guy. The offseason, he's a distraction. He doesn't show up until week 13. And then he wins the Super Bowl going out. And it's like, oh, why do we cut Frank Clark? Well, I mean, look at the dollar figures. You're saving money. Like, he really, was it 4.5 last year? And I get the veteran leadership. You can't really put a dollar figure on that. Word to UD headed to another finals in the third decade of his career. But do you want a UD Frank Clark to come in and be more of a figurehead? Or do you want DeAndre Hopkins to come in? If you're giving me those two options, I say D-Hop because of the talent, right? Nobody's debating his talent. And I remember J.J. Watt even said on social media, he still has some of the best hands in the league for a guy who was doing it with Colt McCoy and some of these busted up quarterbacks. You give him Patrick Mahomes, I'm salivating at what he could do in this offense.
Right.
But I just don't think the dollars and cents make sense. And I think also Kansas City has operated, it's the two parts of it, right? It's the money, and it's the fact that Kansas City already played out a different scenario with their wide receiver room that, yeah, they'll be in the mix and they'll play it out if it's an incentive-laden deal and it makes sense. But I'll take D-Hop in that scenario.
That's interesting. Yeah, no, I really do. DeAndre Hopkins is one of my favorite players that I've ever watched. He's so incredibly captivating, and a lot of people that I've seen kind of justify. I've seen Chiefs Kingdom kind of do this on Twitter of already putting D-Hop down as oh yeah, we didn't want him anyway because it feels like he's not going to choose. He's oh, he's 30, he's going to be 31. He's not as fast as he was, but D-Hop ran a 4.5 40 I think at the combine. So it's he was never super fast to begin with. He is always that guy who can go up and get those contested catches. He can make plays happen. You saw the one time in Arizona when he had that Hail Mary with 4 guys on him. That he can make plays happen, and giving Patrick Mahomes that guy to be able to make plays like that happen would be incredibly exciting. And I think you talk about it from the X's and O's standpoint. I think it takes some pressure off of Kadarius Toney to be a number 1 wide receiver. It takes some pressure off Sky Moore to really have to go into a bigger role than he would really have to. We talked about that very early on in the offseason of I know us at KC Sports Network were talking about just what we thought the Chiefs were going to do in free agency. And they said, okay, we think that they're going to address the offense in free agency, maybe bring in a wide receiver to take some of that pressure off, do some offensive line. But they kind of went heavy on defense, bringing in Charles Minahu, Drew Tranquill, those guys like that. So very interesting to see the roster construction, the wide receiver. And you make a good point about them spending all that capital on wide receivers. They brought in Richie James too. And there's just a lot of those guys in that locker room. It's you're looking at it now and they're feels like they've got 13, 14 wide receivers right now competing for 6 spots.
And they like that 5th, 6th wide out, whoever it is. They like that guy to compete on special teams. So if you shift DeAndre Hopkins in, he's not a guy that's going to be in Dave Toe's unit. I hate to break the news to Chiefs Kingdom, but that makes it even more crucial. Is it a Justin Watson who now has to play the special team snaps? Is it one of the Rosses that you love? Is it a Richie James that comes across? I like and I talked about this as well, and maybe why DeAndre Hopkins makes sense for a team that has a younger quarterback or a more inexperienced quarterback like a Bryce Young in Carolina, which is a team I think makes a lot of sense for him, has the money and the cap space to be able to make it happen. DeAndre Hopkins is a professional wideout. He's one of the best route runners as well. I know JJ thinks he has the best hands, but when I think DeAndre Hopkins, I think routes. I think the footwork is immaculate. I think all of the route tree. I think the sideline catches and the toe drag swag that he's able to do on the sideline. If you bring him into the Chiefs offense, he gives Mahomes that ability to know, or Mahomes gives him that ability to know everything, know where he's going to be, extend the play. Because all you need is space. The whole Chiefs offense and the whole Andy Reid offense is predicated on being able to create that little bit of separation and space from the cornerbacks. DeAndre Hopkins does that at an elite level still. 30, 31, be damned. There's not going to be many people that keep up with him. And I remember the conversations on Twitter, Tucker. People were saying, who's the best wide receiver, not Tyreek Hill, that Patrick Mahomes has ever thrown to? If DeAndre Hopkins is acquired by the Chiefs, it would be him.
Yeah,
unequivocally.
Yeah, possibly with Tyreek Hill too.
Ooh,
you could make that argument.
That's spicy. I'm not going to go that far, but that's spicy.
Listen, one could argue. We're arguing about it right now, so arguably, no. I think, Aaron, let's hit the reset button here on this conversation. Let's talk about some players primed for a breakout. But first, we got to take a break. We'll be back. Aaron and I will be back, and we're going to chop up about some of these players primed for breakout in 2023.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network. Make sure you download our new app. Find it on the App Store or Google Play. Just search KC Sports Network. Entertain, educate, inform. KC Sports Network.
All right, welcome back in here to KCSN Update. Hanging out with Aaron Ladd from 41, sports anchor there. If you're watching the sports, you'll see Aaron Ladd on channel 41 on your dial. Aaron, let's talk about some of these players primed for a breakout in 2023, because I think this roster is so interesting, as we were kind of already talking about before the break about the roster with DeAndre Hopkins getting added to it. The roster already withstanding the wide receiver room is a very interesting group of guys. But who do you kind of, when I say a player primed for a breakout season, who's that first guy that kind of pops into your head when you hear that?
I stay defensive. I'm going to stay away from the wide receiver room because it's just a mess. I'm not going to be able to predict it. Everybody who asks me fantasy questions as far as Chiefs wide receivers, like I have no idea who's the guy there. Defensively, and especially when we talk breakout, I think it's easier. Because this defense had so many rookies last year. This defense had so many guys where it was their first taste of NFL action. It was their first taste of playing a full season, first taste of playing a full postseason, first Super Bowl. I got sick of that going down and down the line last year on who it would be. So I'll stick with young guys. George Karlaftis, to me, seems like that guy that when you say primed for a breakout, he's that guy, especially when you consider, Tucker, how he finished last year's regular season and the postseason with the sack streak. We knew it was going to take a while. He was a guy where Kansas City said when they drafted him day one, he's raw, he's got a few moves, but we see the potential there. And down the stretch, what was it, 5 and 7 weeks or 6 and 8 weeks, whatever it was, he was part of that machine for Kansas City where we started to see the motor a lot more. This is a unit that was in top 5 of sacks last year out of nowhere, right? We were begging them to get to the quarterback more and more. I think George Karlaftis is a big part of what they do as far as breakouts, because the opportunity is there as well. It's a young unit. It's a unit where you're wondering if they should bring back Frank Clark. God dang it! But the opportunity is there for George Karlaftis to enter training camp understanding what it takes to win a Super Bowl, because he did that in his first taste.
He's starting to look like a veteran in that room now. You talk about how young that
Can
room
you say
is,
that about a second guy? Can you say that about a second-year guy?
I don't know, but like you're looking in that room, you're like, a lot of young guys in there. There's a lot of young guys all across that defensive line. I really like what they've done addressing the defensive line as a whole. I really like that pick with George Karlaftis. He's a guy with a high motor who those sacks that he gets, he's not going to be bending off the edge, right? You're not going to see him come around the edge like you usually think of like a Nick or a Joey Bosa to do. He's going to be getting that second effort sack, that third effort sack. He's going to be chasing guys out of bounds. And when I think about breakout players, you're right. I stay on the defensive side of the ball too, because there were so many young guys. And the first guy that came into my mind when I started thinking about, okay, who could be a guy that's really primed for a breakout is Brian Cook. And I think Brian Cook is now in that role where Juan Thornhill's no longer in Kansas City, didn't re-sign him. Now, I don't know if the Chiefs didn't want to re-sign him or he just wanted to go somewhere else and get his money. Good for Juan. I'm glad that he went somewhere to get some money. Glad to see that happen. But Brian Cook now has a bigger role to step into. We saw him play very good towards the end of the season, especially in that Super Bowl, played really nice. I really like what Brian Cook adds to this team and the secondary as a whole, too. You start looking at the secondary, young guys up and down, and they're now second-year players. And I liked what, L'Jarius Sneed was saying about those guys before the Super Bowl. Like, hey, look, they've got a full season under the belt now. They're not rookies no more. Like, they're here to play, here to compete. And I think that Brian Cook's one of those guys who's going to step up and show up big next year.
The second part of like no longer being a rookie and like digesting it and going through it and understanding it is now there's reserves behind you. Like you are part of that next generation that has to do the teaching now. Some of those veterans like a Juan Thornhill or those people who were there for you that kind of took you under and they were your vet or whatever. There's going to be young players that are coming in one Arrowhead Drive now looking at you in that same way. They're going to be looking at a Trent McDuffie and say, dog, you won a Super Bowl. Like, teach me how to get in and out of these routes. Teach me how to learn this playbook. Teach me how to keep my body healthy through an 18-game regular season and a Super Bowl run. Teach me how to play in the freaking cold of Arrowhead Stadium. Like, I think George Karlaftis is going to take that turn, and the reason why I kind of picked him as my breakout guy is because those moments where Frank Clark was teaching him last year kind of off to the side in St. Joe. Oh, that was my dryer. Did you hear my dryer just finish?
Yeah, it's so good.
I think George Karlaftis is going to be, maybe he doesn't do it in the same way that Frank Clark did, as far as like, visibly like, hey, coach you off to the side, but he'll do it in his own way. And I think every guy has that moment in their NFL journey or whatever, where they go from the teach to the teacher, if you will.
Absolutely. Very excited to see kind of this defense as a whole, as I mentioned already, with a bunch of young guys. And again, when I started thinking about like guys primed for a breakout season, I kept going to the defensive side of the ball. Leo Chenal's another one because the Chiefs are going to have to make a decision about Willie Gay. And if Leo Chenal can make that decision for them, if he has a really good year this year. Now, would I love to see them keep this linebacker core together for a while? Yeah, I would absolutely love that. But, in the Patrick Mahomes era, they're always going to want to give Patrick Mahomes a new shiny toy on the offensive side of the ball. Sometimes that comes down to I don't want to maybe manipulating contracts on the defensive side of the ball, right? Like,
100%, yeah.
It's not necessarily a bad thing that they're gonna shortchange guys, and that kind of is a conversation with L'Jarius Sneed too. Is do you re-sign L'Jarius Sneed here with all these young guys? Do you spend that money on the defensive side of the ball when you'd really kind of like to have a nice shiny DeAndre Hopkins or whoever other wide receiver comes out on the other side of this free agency period? But it's gonna be really interesting to see how this defense kind of react or let's say adjust as they're another year older. Do you anticipate seeing any sort of a sophomore slump with these guys, with this group?
It's funny you mentioned Leo Chenal. If he could show his athleticism from parade on like every single one of the like this dude is like scaling buildings. Can you scale buildings in every game from here on out? I wonder about Chenal, and I wouldn't call it a sophomore slump, but it's kind of back to what I was saying earlier about opportunity. That linebacker room is muddied. It's kind of like the wide receiver room. KC's just like, we're getting as many talented, athletic linebackers that fit this one build that we like. We're just going to jam this room, fill as many of them as we can, and we'll see who the best four are. We'll see who the best group is, and we'll go from there. I don't know how often Leo Chenal is going to be in that group, and that's what wonders me about his breakout candidate, so to speak. I stay in the defensive side and say out of Jalen Watson and Josh Williams, which one of those guys is going to be like the L'Jarius Sneed replacement? Because that's going to have to be part of the conversation when we talk about extensions and Chris Jones extension and Mahomes' new contract potentially. LJ is on that list as far as I'm trying to get paid next. I got a ring. I'm playing. You're putting me on your number one receiver or your number two. Like, it's my time. I've exceeded my rookie deal. Like, it's time for me to get paid. We know what KC does. They get a Josh Williams. They get Jalen Watson. And they turn those guys into ballers, and they turn those guys into contributors for a championship organization. The opportunity is there with those two guys as well, Tucker, which is why I'm like, one of those guys I wonder is going to be on the hot seat to either glow up, be the LJ replacement, or possibly be on the hot seat as far as a sophomore slump.
So I want to kind of detour here because I want to talk about L'Jarius Sneed and kind of his contract situation. Do you think he gets re-signed? I think that everybody thinks that Chris Jones is going to get re-signed, restructured. Kind of the combination of both. I think everyone kind of expects that at this point. I know there was a conversation about possibly trading Chris Jones, but I don't think that's going to happen.
Who had that conversation?
I threw it out there. I'll be honest.
No, you start this mess.
I started it, and I said,
"Streets are talking."
These people over here are talking.
What was your logic in that? No. You're not running off the hot seat on that. Give me your logic in trading Chris Jones away.
For sure, his value's never going to be higher than it is right now, right? And so if you can take that value and turn it into possibly younger pieces that are less expensive that you can. You not necessarily defensive pieces, but like his draft picks. What do you think you would trade Chris Jones for? Would it be a first round pick? I would assume is what you would want for
a few. I would want more than one. I would want more than one. I mean, considering, and you said, his draft his value's never been higher. Yeah, he's worth at this point in time one of the most defensive, if not the most dominant interior defensive lineman in the league right now. That's like saying, what would you get for Aaron Donald? I mean, it's up there as far as, I want multiple ones and then maybe a pick swap in the third or like a fifth. Like, if the Chiefs are willing to go down that road, ask for the moon.
100%. 100%. And that was kind of my thought process there is like the haul you could get for Chris Jones. Could that be good in the era where you're coming up where Patrick Mahomes is going to get paid more? He's going to eventually get paid more money. Who knows? He did say he loves winning football games, but listen, everybody wants to get paid more money. And then you're gonna have a lot of guys on the offense side of the ball too. It was a thought that I had.
This has been a nutty KC Sports Network update. You said DeAndre Hopkins is a better Chief than Tyreek Hill already. And you said trade Chris Jones.
Listen, I've already said I've backed away from that one. That was a thought that I threw out there, but I don't agree with it anymore. But I think L'Jarius Sneed is the big one that people are talking about. Hey, maybe trading L'Jarius Sneed, trying to get some value out of that. Kind of the same conversation of trying to get some value out of him while you can, so he just doesn't walk and you don't get anything about him. What are your thoughts on kind of his situation with the contract? Do you think he'll be back, or do you think that they trade him, or is it just he just straight walks?
I usually assume that history is our best foreteller of the future, and the Chiefs have done this as recently as with was it Ward? Didn't they do with Lil Mooney Ward? They let him walk. Mm-hmm. Niners paid him. He's still balling out there as one of the best defensive units in the league. But I think the word is, and I had to kind of catch up on my Chiefs street knowledge. But when I got to the streets, the Chiefs Twitter streets, one of the first things they told me about Brett Veach is that he doesn't pay cornerbacks. That was on his like Tinder profile for a GM. It was like, I don't pay corners. He had a couple things on there. That was one of them. So I'm assuming that somebody else is going to pay him. I'm assuming the Chiefs are going to wring the lemon dry, say, thank you for your services. They'll probably make another deep playoff run this year. I mean, of course, under Mahomes, you can already assume and just pencil them into the AFC title game. So I'm assuming that they're negotiating now in good faith, and they always do, right? But Brett Veach has shown us this tendency to, hey, I have my line in the sand. He did it with Tyreek, and I'm not really budging off of that. And what's the number as far as what Snead is going to want? Is he going to want a top end corner? He's going to say, I want to be top 4 or 5. What is that, 20? Or are we talking 22? I'm looking at his SPO track right now. L'Jarius Snead is 26 years old. He's played 3 years in the league. This is last year, but unrestricted free agent next year. So I'm assuming that the Chiefs front office is saying, hey, you've been a great part of our defense, an anchor. You've played through and set. Because remember, there's a lot of family stuff here as well, right? Like that plays a factor into that. He took some time away from the team. But I think Brett Veach says, hey, thank you so much. This is where we're at right now. We can talk again at the end of the season. We can talk again, because I don't think they want to do this during the season. That's just me reading the tea leaves. That's not me reporting anything. Please don't aggregate me anywhere. But I'm assuming that they're talking now in good faith. We haven't heard anything yet, so it seems like they're not on the same page. But based on the past, he's paid by somebody else, and thanks for his service. There'll be a thank you tweet from @Chiefs.
It certainly will be. How awkward would it be if the Chiefs did tweet out that thank you to Frank Clark, and then they have to come back with we've just re-signed Frank Clark. I thought about that the other day. It's like they tweeted out like they were done. But now that Chris Jones, maybe that's a part of Chris Jones' contract, right? He just says, yeah, you pay me, and then also re-signing Frank Clark for a year. Maybe that's what he's trying to negotiate.
If anybody's going to do that, it's him, because he dedicated his Twitter account to try to bring the Shark back. They already ate some dead cap money in that too. Wasn't it like $7 million or like $9 million or something like that to be able to like designate him as a post June 1 or whatever the hell it was to welcome him back? It would have to be vet men. It would have to be UD deal.
It would have to. It would be a very interesting contract that personally I don't know if Frank Clark would want to sign. Right? I know that, as you already mentioned earlier in the podcast, Chiefs fans like to think that everyone will play for the vet minimum for the Kansas City Chiefs.
Why wouldn't you want to play with Mahomes? I mean, I would play with Mahomes for free, right? That's what Chiefs Kingdom's logic is.
Right. Yeah, these guys are trying to make generational wealth so their great children's children don't have to work. And listen, I can't knock the hustle, honestly. If I was in their spot, I'd be trying to make as much money as I can, because the NFL, not for long. That's what it stands for. All right, Aaron, let's take a break. And when we come back, there's a couple more players I want to talk about. We'll flip to the offensive side of the ball. Talk about some offensive players, and we'll be right back after this.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network. Make sure you download our new app. Find it on the App Store or Google Play. Just search KC Sports Network. Entertain, educate, inform. KC Sports Network.
All right, welcome back into KCS Update. Hanging out with Aaron Ladd. You can find him on Twitter at Aaron Ladd TV. We're talking about some Chiefs breakout players. I'm flipping to the offensive side of the ball here. I want to talk about, I know you wanted to stay away from the wide receiver room, but there's one guy that I wanted to talk about specifically, and that's Sky Moore. I think a lot of guys, a lot of the streets, as we can call them, the Twitter streets of Chiefs Kingdom, putting a lot of pressure on Sky Moore to be a breakout player. But I personally kind of want to see Sky Moore develop into that McCole Hardman role that he had, right? Running a lot of those jet sweeps, kind of, I don't want to say gadget, because I think a lot of times people think a gadget is a negative connotation. That's not necessarily a bad thing to be a gadget player, but a guy who runs a specific set of plays, set of routes. And if he does that, Aaron, do you think he will be treated better than McCole Hardman was?
The wide receiver room is so interesting, because the streets, which I now know that you're in, Tucker Franklin is in the Chiefs streets. You might be the Chiefs streets. You are the Chiefs streets. They just want to know who's going to be that other guy. We know Kelsey's going to be there and dependable, right? We know that we can count on him and his production year in and year out. We know in most cases, if Kadarius Toney is healthy, we know we can count on him to be out there. Who's going to be that other guy? And they want Sky Moore to be that guy. Of course, the investment was a second-round pick, and he's shown the ability to make game-changing plays when he at least catches the ball, word to his punt receiving abilities. But I don't know. I think gadget and that kind of space creator may be a better term for it instead of gadget. Yeah. That role is effective. Is extremely effective in Andy Reid's offense. That there's always going to be a role for that guy. I mean, Andy Reid can make that guy out of pretty much anybody. Richie James might be that guy. He's got that. And when we're talking about the Rosses, John Ross is also another one of those shifty, quick twitch muscles, can move, stop on a dime. They're more of these sports car type builds. Yes, McCole Hardman was one of them, but he's not the only version of that. Sky Moore will fit that role when everything comes together. I think there was a lot of pressure on him last year, and maybe some of that was self-created. And then, I mean, heck, when you're tunneling in your head and you're a rookie and you've never done things before, things snowball. And it snowballed and it torpedoed, and thank goodness it didn't hurt them too terribly. They still managed to win the Super Bowl. But he's going to come back with higher expectations, and he's going to come back with wanting to prove that it wasn't just that one thing. I mean, remember, he scored his first career touchdown in the Super Bowl, in the comeback, in one of those corn dog plays where they weren't lined up right. Like, he finished on that high note. I hope that does a lot for his confidence as far as Sky Moore is concerned.
Same, and I think if you can take him off of like the special teams duties, this is where I think Richie James can be really beneficial for this Chiefs. As you mentioned, they want those wide receiver 5 and 6 to be special teams guys. Richie James has the history, has the ability to return punts, and it gets interesting. I know a lot of Chiefs Kingdom, the last impression they have of a punt return is the Kadarius Toney punt return, and they say, hey, let's put that guy back there. That guy can barely stay on the field as a wide receiver, so let's not try to run.
It doesn't work like that. Yes, that is more of a luxury vehicle than like your everyday driving car. Kadarius Toney back there at punt return. We're talking breakout in the wide receiver room, though. I want to be more reasonable and say like an MVS breakout, quote unquote, would be more. That would be more beneficial to KC's wideout room than anybody, right? Like if you could depend on MVS to be that consistent 3, to say, okay, we're going into our game offensively with Mahomes, Kelsey, and MVS for a bulk of our offense. I would be more confident in that than saying Sky Moore is our 3, because that's just not where he's at yet as far as his development as a player. Just because that's where he is now doesn't mean where he's always going to be. And obviously the Chiefs and also and I'm sure other people in the Twitter streets believe in his potential long term. But if we could go into this year saying MVS and Mahomes have salted down that chemistry a little bit more, and he's the kind of the breakout guy in that room, I think that's what Chiefs fans realistically should be rooting for more than one of the young guys.
Absolutely. And I feel like kind of MVS has not been really talked about this offseason. And the only time people were really talking about it was like, oh yeah, they can cut him and save like this much money. And it's just like, that's not how this works.
He was the hero in the AFC title game.
Yes.
Lest how quickly we forget. The Chiefs aren't even playing for the Super Bowl against the Eagles had it not been for MVS, because they had you and me out there as wide receivers at a certain point after everybody went down. MVS, I know he didn't statistically have a huge year, but he had about an average year for what he's produced in NFL. I mean, if you looked at his numbers with Rodgers and his first year with Mahomes, it was about what you paid for if you're Kansas City. So when people were having the cut MVS conversation, I'm like, are you insane? He needs to be the guy that takes the step forward that keeps you at that consistent top 10 offense pace.
They need to have guys out there that have played professional football before. Like that's the thing. That's the thing. They need guys who have taken meaningful snaps in an NFL game before. Not saying that Kadarius Toney and Sky Moore haven't. They're just limited snaps. Like MVS is more crucial to this team than I think a lot of people think.
MVS, Kelsey, and Mahomes are like your cake. And then what Sky Moore, Kadarius Toney is more so cake, but still kind of icing, especially when they traded for him midway through last year. Then he pops in the Super Bowl and makes some of the biggest plays. Like their contributions and that kind of thing. Justin Watson, I think, is even a little bit more cake as far as like he runs all the routes on the route tree. He can step in for guys individually and play the X, play the Y, like different things. Like I think that ideally, when you're thinking of a Sky Moore contribution to the wide receiver room and what he brings, his 200, 350, 400, whatever yards are more icing to the offense than foundational cake. I'm a hungry guy all the time, so I used a cake reference.
Listen, I haven't had lunch yet, so it's perfect. I'm getting ready. But Aaron, before I let you go, I want to ask you about the NBA Finals coming up.
Ooh.
Denver Nuggets seem like an absolute juggernaut. Just sweeping the Lakers, facing I like to call them the good vibes Heat, a team that just playing strictly off of vibes. And I really want to see the Heat win this series, and I really want to see Jimmy Butler. I've heard some people say the dog got the Jimmy Butler in him because of the way Jimmy Butler plays. It's so bad. Also, the dog in him has kind of gotten out of hand. Let's be honest.
The dog in him is like him. It's like mid. It's starting to get a little outdated.
For sure. So, what are your thoughts? What are your vibes? What are your feelings on this finals?
So I'm ecstatic that, and I am in the presence of another true son. So I couldn't help but start off without mentioning that either way. Nuggets win, Heat win. There will be a Missouri NBA champion this year. Shout out Drew Smith, who was part of the Heat organization at some point this year. And, of course, MPJ, Michael Porter Jr. on the Denver Nuggets. The Eastern Conference Finals was like such a fever pitch. Like, I feel like this is like a letdown a little bit. But I'm not underrating the Heat. As a Hawks fan, I kind of am confused how we beat them in the first play-in game, and now that they are have completely circled back. I mean, there were points in that second play-in game where I thought that they were going to get knocked out. Was it the Bulls?
Yeah.
And I didn't know what was going on there. I'm not thinking that this is going to, everybody's saying Nuggets in 5. That's been a very trendy thing or pick to say, but I could see the Heat stealing game 1. They've done it in all the previous series to this point. They stunned Milwaukee. They stunned New York. They stunned Boston. I wouldn't be shocked if they run and get the game 1 here as well. They're gritty. we should be talking more about Caleb Martin than we should be talking about Jimmy Butler. I think he got absolutely snubbed for Eastern Conference Finals MVP. Like, the things that Caleb Martin has shown the ability to do in these it's like Monstar Space Jam stuff here. Like, I saw his numbers in the regular season. He's averaging like 10 more points per game in the playoffs than he was in the regular. Like, that's not supposed to happen. He's shooting like 60% from the floor in the Eastern Conference Finals. Like, this guy who might not even be in the league without the help of J. Cole. Yes, that J. Cole, Jermaine Cole, after he got cut from the Charlotte Hornets, who their owner must not know anything about basketball, Tucker. It's
weird.
It's insane. I think the Nuggets win, but I think it's a more competitive series. I won't make an official prediction, but it's fun, man. It's our last taste of basketball for a very long time, and then it's back to Royals baseball.
Yes, sir. Well, if you want more NBA podcasts, you can find Aaron Knight's NBA podcast. It's coming up soon. No, I'm just joking. But Aaron, I appreciate you hanging out with me for a little bit, talking some Chiefs, talking some hoops, talking a little bit of everything, talking the Twitter streets here on today's KCS Update. Any final thoughts?
No, appreciate y'all having me on, man. Enjoy those vacations. Enjoy the summertime. Get outside, touch grass, have fun. We'll be back at Arrowhead rocking here in 99 days it is now.
That's going to do it for today's KCS Update. Thank you all so much for hanging out, making us a part of your day. We'll be back next week, I think. I don't want to lie to you, but I think I'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, I'll talk to you later.
Thanks for watching this production of KC Sports Network, the fastest growing sports media network in Kansas City. Check out these videos that feature our team of more than 15 former players, insiders, and analysts, bringing you the best Chiefs coverage you can find. Entertain, educate, inform. KC Sports Network.